What up, AP Euro fam? All right, so today we're going to be diving into what exactly is a DBQ and what are you going to be graded on. In a different video, we'll look at some tips and tricks to kind of get into and how to tackle the DBQ, which we've already started in class. And then I have a last look. We have a little bit of notes or a slideshow that actually breaks down the components of your response, like what your essay should actually consist of and how to best kind of tackle getting the points required on the rubric. So for right now, let's focus at what exactly is the DBQ. So DBQ stands for document-based question, as we've talked, and really this is an essay designed to give you the job of a historian for 1 hour. And so what will happen is in this 1 hour chunk of time, you're going to have 15 minutes to read over 7 documents that they've already curated into a bundle, and they all somehow connect to a prompt. And so when you look at this, the very first thing you want to do is make sure you understand that prompt, and then you're reading these documents. And as you read, we're not looking for main idea, we're really looking for the purpose of finding evidence connected to the prompt. So then your job in this essay is not to give a book report, main idea collection, but instead is to formulate your own argument, your own claim or thesis that answers the prompt. And then you're going to use information pulled from those documents, almost like that was your research, but you're going to pull your best information and use that to defend your interpretation, your argument. And then that's a 45-minute writing period. So grand total, 1 hour. All right, so the documents will look like this. And so here's the prompt. Evaluate whether the 30 Years' War was fought primarily for religious or primarily political reasons. So at the end of this, that's your goal. As a historian, you're going to argue whether it was mainly religious or political. Okay. So then you have these 7 documents. Varying links, varying perspectives, varying points of view. You will always have at least one visual document. It could have more, but there will always be at least one of those. Okay, and so then you read through them. In that 15 minutes, remember, we've already looked at in class how to come up with a code and really be purposeful when you read. So like, oh, I'm reading, and this seems like this is all about religion. So R equals, and then you talk about it. Okay. So how are you actually going to be scored? Because understanding how you're going to be assessed will determine really what you want to do with these documents. So let's take a look at the rubric. Okay. So the rubric. It is a 7-point essay rubric. The average score is usually about a 3 out of 7. And that's why I really love the essay, because it's the one area of the test where you can clearly see the pathway to being better than the population of students that you're in essence competing with. And so throughout this, hopefully you'll see your pathway to getting a 6 or 7 on the rubric. All right, so the very first point, it makes sense, is the foundational point of an essay, and that is your claim or your thesis. Now, this will happen, hopefully, at the end of your introductory paragraph. Now, there's a couple things to note about the thesis. The thesis is quite an important driving statement in your essay. And so because of that, notice what it says here. It doesn't just respond to the prompt, but it gives a historically defensible claim that establishes lines of reasoning. So if you just said that the 30 Years' War was caused for a bunch of reasons, that does not answer the prompt. If you said it was caused primarily by religious causes, that still does not establish a line of reasoning. If you said it was caused by religious causes like Protestantism, that's still not a line of reasoning, because what does Protestantism mean as far as a cause? So when you get to this thesis, you really want to make sure that you develop a rich, defensible claim. So the 30 Years' War was primarily caused for religious reasons, partially because Protestants were denied the right to practice their faith, but also Catholics believed that it was their legal right to force uniformity. topic with defense, topic with defense. They give you some decisions over here about this too. It cannot just be a restatement of the prompt, and it should consist of one or more, and I would argue it's almost always going to be a 2-sentence kind of thing. And you probably want it at the end of that intro so that you dive into your essay with your argument fresh. It's right there, ready to go. One-word answers, one-word groupings are not good enough, right? Really build it rich. Now, also in that intro is where you should begin contextualization. You're not going to be done with it, but you want to bring it up in your intro. So contextualization is where you describe a broader historical context that's relevant to your prompt. So we're talking about the 30 Years' War and whether it's political and religious. Well, to earn this point, then we want to relate that topic to broader historical events, developments, or processes that occurred before, during, or continue after the time frame of our question. And it's not going to be awarded for just a phrase or a passing reference. So bringing it up in our intro and then revisiting it somewhere in our essay. So if we're talking about the 30 Years' War, we could put that in the greater context that had been the Reformation and the wars of religion, right? And so we had already had the French Civil Wars, we had Dutch Wars of Independence, we had had the Habsburg-Valois Wars. So these other religious conflicts had preceded this. Okay, we could talk about the idea of political turmoil at this time, the great rivalry of the Habsburgs with other nations growing, and so we could talk about that. Contextually, we could talk about what comes after this, right? That after the 30 Years' War, that the religious question is largely solved because of the Peace of Westphalia, but that the political causes for war will continue on, specifically looking at like territorial and dynastic claims to power. That's context, right? I'm pinning it to something. Okay, now when we get into the body paragraphs, right, that's where we really start to bring in our evidence, right? So if we're saying one of the causes was the denial of Protestants to practice their faith, well, we got to back that up. So that's where we start bringing in evidence. And so that's our third and possible fourth point on the rubric. Now, notice you get 1 point for just using the information accurately from 3 of the documents. That's a very low bar, right? You just understood them and got information in the right place, matched up to your topic for that paragraph. But you earn an extra point, or you can get a second point by supporting your argument. And notice the difference. Supporting an argument. So it's not just saying, well, here's some information about Protestants. You're saying that they were denied the right to practice their faith, and that fueled them to fight. And then here's a tidbit, and here's a tidbit. And you're doing that for 6 or more of the documents. So you're using all but one or all of the documents. So that means probably, right, if you've got 3 body paragraphs, you're doing at least 2-3 documents per paragraph. Okay, notice to earn 1 point, the response must accurately describe rather than just quote the content from the documents. To earn 2 points, the response must accurately describe rather than simply quote content from 6 or more. In addition, the response must use the content of the documents to support the argument. What they're trying to say is you can't just take a block quote and go, well, Protestants were mad. Bloom, here's a quote. And then, Calvinists didn't feel like they had rights. Clunk, here's a quote. Embed it, right? So Calvinists were angered by, little mini quote, their inability to practice freely. Denial, in quotes, of their rights, right? It's where you want to really build your point, build your argument, but then just use little bits of ammunition from the documents. All right. Sometimes you can't quote the document. Sometimes that visual document, it's hard to quote. So you just describe the document. You build the concept that's in or being represented in the document, and that also counts. But it has to be specific, right? It has to be to a level that shows specificity to the document. Now, also in evidence, there's a third kind of point. So it's almost like a second bonus point if you want to look at it that way. And that's inventing your own document. Or what I mean by that is bringing outside information that is to the quality or to the depth of a document. So specifically, right, we're looking at the 30 Years' War. Maybe you know that one of the causes of the 30 Years' War was a nation like France just wanting to weaken its rival. But there's no document that says that. But in your body paragraph where you're talking about political causes, you could talk about the very political cause that was France wanting to destroy its territorial and military rival, the Habsburgs. And so if you could like give something specific like, well, Cardinal Richelieu was a politique because even though a Catholic, he sided with Protestants to weaken another Catholic enemy, that could be a document that you brought up. That's a bonus point. Okay, the last category then is analysis and reasoning. These ones are slightly more challenging, I would argue. This first one, not so bad, right? This one is one that I would encourage you guys to aim for when you write, and that is source analysis. So remember, we practiced looking at our little high school game, right? And we looked at point of view and tone, reliability, purpose. If we do that for 3 or more documents and we do it accurately, we can earn a point for that, right? So we look at one of the documents and it was written by a noble talking to the Holy Roman Emperor. Well, maybe we would look at that and say, well, point of view, he's not going to lie to his boss. And so that means that his words are trustworthy. Or as a Protestant, it's unsurprising that he's mad at the Catholics because they hold power and aren't, letting them be represented, whatever, right? So by bringing in source analysis, you can earn a point. And then the last point, I'll tell you right now, I usually tell students not to aim for this one. It's like what I call the unicorn point. It is so difficult to get, and they don't even necessarily always know how students will get this point. I think it's actually kind of a dumb point to have. As a reader, this one very rarely gets assigned. But basically what you're doing here is it shows a complex understanding of the historical developments. And so really they give you other criteria that you might want to almost in addition to the prompt look at. So we're looking at primarily, was it religious or political? But then if we also wanted to look at similarities and differences between this and maybe the causes of the Habsburg-Valois Wars, or if we looked at this and tried to compare it to, the causes of, the French Revolution, or we could look at continuity and change, which is normally a good one to look at. So we're going to say that it was, religious and political, but maybe we noticed that at the beginning, it was mainly a certain thing, religious, but by the end, it had become mainly political. If we make that a goal of ours to explain that and support that throughout, now we've added continuity and change to our essay, to our purpose. That's a point. Okay, so all those add up to 7, and so that's the goal, right? To use this rubric to really go after it. What I would tell you is truthfully, what I encourage my students to go for is 6 of the 7. If you're not a very strong writer, start with aiming for 3, right? Have a thesis and use the documents, right? And from there, it's easy to add context and source analysis. So then you can go to 4, 5, outside info, 6, and then eventually you build to this last point. All right, in our next video, we'll look at some tips and tricks, and then finally we'll look at how to construct or actually build your response to the DBQ. All right, take care.